There's a physician in Washington, D.C. named LaSalle Lafall who actually under the Clinton administration chaired what's called the President's Cancer Panel. He's a world-renowned physician specializing in breast cancer. And he always tells me, he says, Doug, there are 4 things in life that never come back. He says, the sped arrow, the spoken word, times past, and the neglected opportunity. So I thought I would share that with you today and take this opportunity to acknowledge President Clinton's work, because without his leadership on so many civic and charitable initiatives, we wouldn't all be here. And so I, having grown up outside of Washington, D.C., having watched my brother serve under President Clinton, I know the impact that he's had on our lives and on so many others. And so I wanted to make sure to acknowledge that here today. It is really humbling to be here. I was on the website and I was looking at all these other speakers that come through here, and I thought, wow, I can't believe I'm amongst these great minds. And so for us as a social cause and a social movement and a grassroots advocacy organization, to have all of you interested enough to attend is phenomenal. What I'd like to do today is just share a few words about sort of the history of LiveStrong, where we've been, where we are today, and where we're headed. But I thought I would start by asking you to indulge me in a quick activity. And that is, if you have had cancer, if you would stand up, if you're comfortable, and remain standing. Okay, now remain standing. If you or someone in your family has had cancer and survived the disease, stand up and remain standing. And if you know somebody who battled the disease and unfortunately lost their life to cancer, please stand up and remain standing. Okay, just take one look around. That's why I'm here today. We are on the verge of a global epidemic as the result of a disease known as cancer. Thank you very much. The statistics would tell you that 1 in 2 men will have cancer in their lifetime and 1 in 3 women. They would tell you that just in the United States alone, 1.4 million people will be diagnosed this year, and almost 600,000 will unfortunately lose their lives. 8 million people diagnosed this year alone around the world. More than AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis combined will die every year of this disease, and by next year, cancer will become the #1 cause of death around the world. I don't tell you those statistics to scare you or instill any fear, but just to set the reality of this illness and give it some perspective. Before I get into talking about LiveStrong and where we're headed, I thought it was important to talk to you a little bit about who I am and how I got to be here. I had the most blessed life I could have asked for. I grew up in the first planned city in the country. It's a city called Columbia, Maryland. It's based right between Baltimore and Washington, developed by a very well-known developer named Jim Rouse, and he built this city from scratch. It was farmland 42 years ago. My parents, who at the time were both living in Washington, D.C., decided to move to this sort of idyllic community, and it was built on the value of diversity. It was built in a way that every neighborhood had single-family homes and apartments and townhouses and condos. Every neighborhood had great public schools. Every neighborhood had what was called an interfaith center. There were no churches and synagogues, but there were interfaith centers. On Friday night, it would be a synagogue, and on Sunday morning, it would be a church. And I didn't know anything different. That's just the environment where my brother and I grew up. I had the good fortune of playing soccer and going to Brown University, and in the summer of 1996, my brother, who at the time was working for President Clinton, working way too hard, traveling all over the country, working on the re-election campaign, he had gotten out of shape. And I liked to remind him that he was sort of getting out of shape. And so I said, Ken, we were sitting on the couch in my parents' house, August 1996. I was getting ready to go back for my sophomore year of college. We were the second-ranked soccer team in the country. I had already worked out that day, and I said, Ken, we should go for a run. Not that I really wanted to go for a run, but I just thought it would sort of be a good motivating thing for him. So we went on about a 4-mile run, and he likes to say that he was so mad, because this is my older brother. He was so mad that I was ahead of him. The whole time he was just sort of cursing under his breath. And we got back to the house, and we were sitting on the couch, and it's probably the last time I watched the Orioles game. But I had this wheezing, this sort of feeling in my chest, and I couldn't get rid of it. And after about 2 hours, my parents said, maybe we should go to the emergency room. So we went to the emergency room, and as I was leaving, the physician on call said, everything's fine, it's just pollen in the air. It was a hot, humid August night. But right as we were leaving, he said, but let's just do a chest x-ray. So we did the x-ray, and we went home. The next morning I woke up, I felt 100%. I was coaching soccer at a local camp. I went to camp, I coached soccer, I worked out afterwards, I came home, and this will date the story a little bit, but at that time we had an answering machine. And I remember hitting the little button because it was blinking, and there was a message from my family physician who said, Doug, the hospital has a protocol where we call and they let him know that one of his patients had been in the hospital the night before. He said, it just so happened I was there seeing another patient today, and I looked at the chest x-ray. And unfortunately, you need to have a CAT scan immediately. He said, I've scheduled it for this evening. That's all the message said. I immediately called my parents. We went to have the CAT scan done. And all I remember from that experience is sliding out of the CAT scan apparatus. And out of the corner of my eye, in the left corner of the room, there was a glass window. And on the other side of that window, the technician was sitting there. And the technician was pointing at the screen. And over the shoulder, I could make out sort of the silhouette of an individual who looked like my mom. And I thought, wow, that's probably not normal. And that was my real introduction to the medical world. I had never been in the hospital before. I had never been sick. I'd never broken a bone. I had never been exposed to the healthcare enterprise. And long story short, I was told that I had a tumor growing in my chest, right between my lungs, my ribs, and my spine. I was told at the time that it was probably benign because I had no symptoms as a result of that. Having ended up in the emergency room the night before was total coincidence, total fluke. And they actually told me at the time, if you want to go back and play soccer this fall, just come back during winter break and we'll deal with it then. And it never sort of resonated with me, and I sort of felt like, well, I don't know that I can live my day-to-day life knowing something's growing inside of me. So a week later, I scheduled surgery. I entered the hospital, extremely naive. Never forget getting to the hospital at 5:30 in the morning for surgery where they were going to take out part of my rib cage and this tumor. And my mom said, well, I'm going to stay overnight with you. And I thought, this is crazy. I'm 19. I don't need anybody to stay in the hospital with me. And I'll never forget, my mom said, if your dad was in the hospital, I would stay overnight with him. And boy, I was so glad that she did. That first night, I had an episode where I had a reaction to the morphine that they had given me right after my surgery. It was a code blue. My blood pressure dropped to 34/24. I lost 10 pounds in the matter of an hour. And I'm very fortunate that I had both my parents there to advocate on my behalf at a time when you feel so run down and you're not able to speak up oftentimes. Throughout this experience, about a week later, I went back to that same sterile hospital and I heard a doctor say, Doug, well, it's official. We've sent your pathology to 4 hospitals. The Mayo Clinic has just weighed in. You have cancer. It's a rare form of cancer called chondrosarcoma. I will tell you, I have never experienced anything like that. Something where you sit in a room for an hour and you can only remember the first 5 minutes, that first sentence. I don't remember what they said after that. My mom was bawling, crying. My dad was staring at this brick wall. It's as vivid today as it was back then. And that's when I sort of became a part of this broader cancer community. On the ride home from the hospital, I remember this was August, my parents said, do you want to go back to school? Do you want to stay home? Whatever you want to do, we'll make it work. And that night we sat around and we said, you know what, I'm going to go back to school. I want to be around my friends, I'm going to be around my teammates, and no matter what happens on the educational side, in terms of grades, it's better to be there when everybody else is there. And I started calling cancer organizations. I started asking, well, what do you offer for people my age with cancer? Do you have support groups? Do you have programs? What kinds of activities do you offer? And I got answers that ranged from, well, people your age don't get cancer, to, well, we don't really do much in that area. That's sort of a niche. We're not really focused on that. And when I was in the hospital, I had this experience as well where, our medical system is created around 2 segments. It's pediatrics and it's adult medicine. And there's nothing specifically for young people. So when you're 19, some doctors would put you in the pediatric side of the hospital, some would put you on the adult medicine side. But you don't really fit either way. And that was sort of my thought when I was thinking about looking for support and resources. I really just wanted to meet somebody else my age who had cancer, who I could connect with. So being raised in this sort of setting in Columbia and being raised by parents who were involved in every civic organization and always had political signs on the yard and sort of were active members of the community, it just hit me one night. I was sitting in my dorm room in Providence, Rhode Island, and I called my parents after watching a TV show on Primetime Live. It was hosted by Sam Donaldson and at the time a correspondent named Judd Rose. And Sam had just battled melanoma and Judd was battling a brain tumor. And they did a whole series on cancer. And at the end of the show they said, you know, we need more people to get involved. And so I called my parents and I said, we got to do something. We got to start a foundation. We have to start an organization that's geared towards providing support and education for young adults who are affected by cancer. And so that's what we did. Unfortunately, my cancer experience continued in March of the following year. I was sitting in Providence and I got a call from my doctor and she said, well, it's official. The biopsy you had last week came back and it's melanoma. And it was quite a blow. I had spent the last 7-8 months learning everything I could about chondrosarcoma. In fact, my roommate and my friends thought it was disgusting, but I had found on the internet, which I was sort of new to the internet at that time, a picture of a chondrosarcoma, this gnarly looking cartilage tumor. And I had it as my screensaver on my computer. And they thought it was really poor taste. But I tell you that because when I heard the words malignant melanoma, I thought, wait a minute, I just learned all I could about this other thing. I don't know anything about it. Here I was at an Ivy League institution, having had a great education as a child, and I knew nothing about this disease that we call cancer. A few months later, I had what I will describe to you as the hardest day of my life. On June the 2nd, 1997, I went to Johns Hopkins for a checkup and to have some stitches removed from my upper arm where about 10 days earlier they had removed a mole, tiny little mole. And it was the first time in this year of experience that I had gone to the hospital by myself. My parents had left a week earlier on a cruise to Alaska to sort of get away from it all. And as I sat in the waiting room at Johns Hopkins, usually, you know, you wait for 5 or 10 minutes, the nurse comes in, takes the stitches out, it's no problem. After about 30 minutes, I went to the nursing station. I said, is there any reason that there's a delay? And she said, the doctor would like to see you. And I knew. And so when I was diagnosed with invasive melanoma that day, the third diagnosis within 10 months, the diagnosis was hard, but it paled in comparison to having to drive to BWI Airport and pick up my parents that night and have to listen to them talk about this amazing trip to Alaska and have to tell them in the car that I had been diagnosed with actually the most aggressive of the 3 types of cancer that I've had. And to this day, that is the hardest and has been the hardest experience of my life within this cancer battle. So long story short, I've been personally touched. I understand the impact that this disease has not only on the individual but on the family, and the impact that this disease has not only medically but psychosocially and emotionally. It's not something you can ever prepare for, and it's something that can be, in some regards, devastating. We started the foundation, we started to grow the organization, and about a year after my initial diagnosis, I was sitting in my dorm room, and I got an email. And the email read in part, I read a story about you. I think we have a lot in common. We're both athletes. I've just started a foundation. If there's anything we can ever do together, let me know. And at the end it said, just remember, we're the lucky ones. And it was signed Lance Armstrong. And I thought, lucky? How are we lucky? And it took me years to figure that out. The other thing I thought was, who's Lance Armstrong? I like to tell him that all the time. And he always says, well, I was the world champion. I said, the world champion of cycling? Come on, no one knew who the world champion of cycling was. This was 1997. And he had just started the Lance Armstrong Foundation. He had not won the Tour de France yet. And Lance was an interesting individual. I mean, many of you know his story, but I will just remind you of a few things that sort of get lost now in the bigger picture aspect of his life. When he was diagnosed, he went to an institution to get a second opinion. They told him he was going to die. He wanted to find another opinion. So he ended up in Indianapolis at the University of Indiana, or at Indiana University, and he was riding at the time for a French team. And the French cycling team sent one of their representatives to the hospital to visually describe to them how sick he was. This individual flew over from Paris, walked into Indianapolis, went into the hospital room, spent 5 minutes in the hospital room, went out in the hallway, called back to Paris and said, he's dying. The next day they cut his contract. So he was in Indianapolis needing several months of inpatient chemotherapy and surgeries, and he lost his insurance. Now, because of the sort of debate that we're in now over healthcare, I thought it was important to mention what happened as a result. Here he is, 26 years old, had made $1 million already. He was the world champion after all. And he was lying in a hospital bed fighting for his life without insurance. One of his sponsors, Oakley Corporation that makes sunglasses, called and said, we're going to put you on our insurance plan. CEO of Oakley called the insurance company. Insurance company said, you can't add him. He's got cancer. Can't add him to the plan. CEO of Oakley called back and said, if you don't add him, we will take our business to someone else. 13 and a half years later, Lance Armstrong and all of his kids are employees of the Oakley Corporation, and that's where they receive their health insurance. And he would tell you if he was here today, it is entirely unacceptable that our health and well-being is left to luck. He was entirely lucky. He had a sponsor that was progressive and willing to look out for him, but had he not, he would have probably died of this disease. And so that's one part of the story that oftentimes gets lost. The other part that gets lost is when he left the hospital, the day his treatment ended, he was getting ready to go back to Austin. His doctor, Craig Nichols, who now serves on our board, stopped him at the doorway and said, I want to talk to you about something called the obligation of the cured. And Lance said, well, sounds good. You said cured. He said, am I cured? And Craig said, no, I don't know that. He said, it'll take years to know if you really have gone into remission and if this disease is gone from your body. He said, but this hospital has two doors. He said, it's got one on the left and one on the right. And he said, the one on the left, you can walk out and you can never talk about your illness and you can go back to your life and you can live a great life, and that's fine. He said, on the one on the right is the one known as the obligation of the cured. And that means when you walk out of here, you agree to share your story, you agree to talk to others, and you agree to try and affect change by helping somebody else. So Lance sort of walked out that metaphorical door, and he came back to Austin, Texas, and there's a great little restaurant in Austin on 6th Street called Z Tejas. Many of you probably know. And he went to dinner with his friends. And they sat around the table, and they said, you know what, we're going to do something. We're going to start a foundation. They wrote on napkins, and they said, we're going to do a bike ride. We're going to raise money. And at the time, their goal was to raise $10,000. And that's how this whole thing started. And so the point is that the reason that we've been able to have such success in recent years is because of the authenticity of the story and because of the fact that this foundation was started before he ever knew he was going to ride again. This was not an afterthought. This was not, oh, I'm standing on the podium on the Champs-Élysées, maybe I should start a foundation and try and help people with cancer. He had no idea what this organization would become. And when I joined the organization in 2001, we had 4 employees. The foundation was started as a group solely focused on testicular cancer. It then expanded to urologic cancers, and then in 2000 expanded to what we call survivorship and quality of life. How can you ensure that every individual who's diagnosed with cancer has the opportunity to have a high-functioning, wonderful quality of life after the illness? And in about 2002, we were creating a new program for cancer survivors. It was an educational program online, and we hired a local marketing firm. And we said, we need you to create the branding and the name of this program. And so they went and they did focus groups with survivors and their families. They did research with umpteen number of people. It took almost 9 months. And they came back to us. At the time, I think we had 8 or 9 employees. And they laid out 10 boards of these concepts. And it had a logo and it had a name. And they said, we want you to vote which one you like the best. And I would be lying if I stood here and told you that all 8 or 9 people picked LIVESTRONG, because they didn't, and I didn't. And I don't remember what the other ones were. But at the time, it didn't jump out as, oh, yeah, it should definitely be LIVESTRONG. Looking back, clearly, it was the right choice. And LIVESTRONG was born as this program for cancer survivors that lived on our website. In 2004, Nike came to us and they said, we want to partner with you to honor Lance going for his 6th victory. And so what we're going to do is we're going to donate $1 million to the foundation, and we're going to make 5 million yellow wristbands. And at the time, they said, we're going to relaunch our Just Do It marketing campaign. So we're going to put Just Do It on the wristbands. And we sort of looked around, and you know, I think they sensed from the response that it wasn't that positive, and it was too corporate. And so then they came back and they said, okay, well, we understand that Lance's mantra is Carpe Diem. So we thought, maybe we'll put Carpe Diem on the wristband. That was better, but it still wasn't that great. So they left Austin. First of all, we thought they were crazy. We had never sold anything in our lives, much less 5 million of something. And so they went back to Beaverton, Oregon, And they searched around on our website and they found this program called LiveStrong. And one of the folks from the marketing department at Nike called and said, we figured it out. It's got to be LiveStrong. And so that's how this whole thing was really born. It started in April of 2004. We did run out, which actually helped fuel the interest. I will never forget that I had the opportunity to go on CNBC, and this was August of 2004, and I was on Squawk Box in the morning. And the host of Squawk Box is Mark Haynes, and he's known to sort of be fairly aggressive in terms of the way he questions people. And I'm sitting in the studio in Austin staring into this camera, and he says, Doug, how could you have possibly underestimated the demand? And I said, Mark, we've never sold anything in our lives. We're focused on cancer. We've got 9 people. You know, and so this story just sort of grew and grew and grew. And I will tell you, there were a lot of nights when we would text each other back and forth, people in the office and Lance, and 2 nights in particular that come to mind. One is Justin Gatlin, who's a runner for the U.S. Olympic team in 2004, won the 100 meters in Athens. And as he was doing his victory lap, it was about 9 o'clock Eastern time on NBC, and he's carrying the American flag around, and all you see is this yellow wristband. And so people in the office are like, oh my gosh, are you watching this? Well, from 9 p.m. that night till 9 a.m. the next morning, we sold 400,000 wristbands on our website, just because of that visibility, which we couldn't have ever purchased or paid for. The other story is that during, think about the times that we were living in 2004, in the aftermath of 9/11 and the war in the Middle East, the sensitivities were extremely high. And one of the things that happened during the Olympics was there was a runner from Morocco, is the best middle distance runner of all time. He had won everything, everywhere, except for Olympic gold medal. And he is one of, if not the most famous Muslim athlete in the world. And Hisham El Garouj won the 10,000 meters, and he got down on the track to pray, and all you saw was his yellow wristband. And at that point, we knew that not only was this an issue around cancer, or an issue around surviving a disease or an illness, but this was a broader message that could be delivered all around the world. And my hypothesis is, yes, the wristband has raised a lot of money. We've sold more than 70 million of them, and they continue to sell at 4 to 5 million per year. But it has changed the way people think about philanthropy. Philanthropy used to be something that you did as a second career. It used to be something that you did after you made money and had resources. This was the great equalizer. It was $1. Everybody could participate. And the fact that every cause now has a wristband is unbelievable. We love it. As long as they're not for-profit and not, the ones sold at 7-Eleven, it's fine. We often remark that in 2005, one of our biggest donors, it's sort of a joke, was Elliot Spitzer. Because as the AG, he would shut down these rings of counterfeiting in New York City. And the law was that they had to actually send us the merchandise and whatever money they found in these places. So we'd get these checks from the state of New York saying, oh, we found this great place, and they had 1 million yellow wristbands packaged just like yours, and here was the cash that we found on site. And so he became a big supporter. And what the wristband did was it gave us a brand. And most nonprofits never have the chance to have a brand that resonates around the world. And today, we talk about the wristband being our biggest asset. Sure, we have Lance, and we have his ability to get us into rooms and connect us and leverage resources and use his visibility. But in 20, 30, 40 years, if we steward that brand in the correct way, LiveStrong will impact the lives of so many people. The other question I get asked all the time about the wristband is, well, was it a fad? Was it a phenomenon? And absolutely, it was. But the research shows that people understood, even if it was at the most basic level, that it was about cancer. And I always do this, it's really annoying, but I travel a lot, and I always say to people that have the wristband on, well, why do you wear that? Or where did you get that? And one day I was in the grocery store, and there was a young woman checking me out, and she was probably 16 or 17, and she was the cashier, and I said, I'm just curious. She had a pink wristband and a yellow wristband. I said, I'm just curious, why are you wearing those wristbands? And she looked at me, incredibly poised, and she said, the pink one is for my mom, who survived breast cancer, and the yellow one is for everybody else who has cancer. And I was just blown away. This was a few years ago, and I thought, if we did nothing else, but reach people in that way with an understanding of what this was all about, we would have changed the world to some degree. The fact that 20 years ago people were mortified of talking about their cancer diagnosis, and now they would wear something on their body that identified them with the disease has changed and hopefully eliminated a lot of the stigma. So as a direct service organization, we began to get more involved in advocacy. And we realized that as a relatively small organization, we raise about $40 to $45 million a year. In the scheme of sort of cancer, that is extremely small. To give you a frame of reference, the American Cancer Society, great partner of ours, raises almost $1 billion a year. So we are minuscule by comparison, and our goal is not to become the biggest or largest organization. But we realized that this yellow wristband created a movement. It created an army of people around the world who cared about the disease. And so we tried to put this into effect. We said, okay, let's take this for a spin and let's see how it works. About 3 years ago, we decided to do an initiative in Texas, which became known as Proposition 15. Very similar to what was done in California around stem cell research. We said, look, we've got all these people, all this energy. We could take $1 million or $2 million or $5 million or $10 million and we could spend it on cancer research, or we could go and advocate for more money and funding for not only research but also for prevention. So we went into this constitutional amendment battle in the state of Texas. The way it works is it had to pass both houses of the legislature, it had to be signed by the governor, and then it had to be ratified in a special election by the people of the state. Long story short, we were able to succeed, and the result of that is an investment by the state of Texas of $3 billion, $300 million a year for the next 10 years, which will not only drive significant results in terms of prevention and research, but it will drive the economy. Now, had we have done that this year, there's no way. The setting, the time, everything was sort of ripe a few years back. So we spent $780,000, and the way we look at it is we got $3 billion. None of that money is coming to us, nor would we want it to come to us. But we got $3 billion for the cause, and it showed our organization, and it showed many of the people that work with us who may not have had experience in sort of the public sector or in government or in advocacy, that there was a big opportunity. In 2008, we decided to host, just as another example, the first ever town hall presidential event around cancer. So #1 killer around the world by January of next year. Never had there been an event with President of the United States or candidates for the presidency of the United States talking about this disease. And I'll tell you a funny story. We talk about being young, naive, and audacious. And it's that combination that I think is the most powerful, in that the energy and youthful excitement that you can bring to an idea or a cause is incredibly valuable. Being audacious enough to set goals that seem unachievable, and being naive enough to think we can change the world. So the example that I give you is that we're planning this event in this town hall, and it's in Columbus, Ohio. We figured the candidates have to go through Ohio, so we'll do it there. We'll do it on campus. It'll be great. We've got thousands of cancer survivors coming. And 2 weeks before, then Senator Obama, staff calls and says, unfortunately, Senator's not going to be able to make it. He has to go to the Middle East and Europe, and this is the only window before the election that he can do it, so he just can't be there. And if you would have walked through our office, you would have thought that we had gone out of business, that everybody's family had died. I mean, it was so somber. And it took me a few days to realize what had happened. I mean, I was saying, why are people so upset? I mean, I was angry too, but it was just so depressing. And it was because we are so naive and so audacious. We thought that an organization that's 11 years old, tiny little organization in Austin, Texas, the first time we set out to have the 2 final candidates for the most powerful job in the world, that they would just show up. That they would show up to talk about the issue that we care about. And that's a great environment to work in. We thought it was going to happen. Now, Senator McCain came. President Obama was not able to come. But that afternoon, he released his plan on how he was going to fight cancer. And in his first State of the Union this year, he talked about eradicating cancer in our lifetime. First time a president has ever done that in their State of the Union, ever. So it worked, and we've seen the results. But it showed me that our team was so naive and so audacious. And I sort of think about that all the time. I had the opportunity to be in Denver at the Democratic convention and watch the president accept the nomination. And I went back to Austin and I talked to our staff and I said, listen, this is a social movement. This is a cause. And this is not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen next week. It's not going to happen next year. And sitting in that stadium in Denver and watching people weep People who had worked on this cause, civil rights, for decade after decade after decade, never thinking that what they saw that night or what they see today would have been possible. And that's what this is about. Cancer is 500 different diseases. It is not going to be solved tomorrow. Anybody who tells you there's going to be a cure for cancer is dead wrong. It's not going to be cured by a silver bullet. It's going to take millions and millions of people talking about prevention and early detection and making sure people have access to care and making sure research. And if unfortunately someone's going to die, making sure someone is allowed to die with dignity and grace. And so that youthful energy and that impatience is what drives us, but we also have to be realistic that this is going to take day after day after day, and it's the cause of our lives. So just a few more examples, and then clearly interested to open it up for questions. But last week we had LiveStrong Day. We had 1,200 events all over the country, all volunteer-driven. And these are people who are standing up for this idea that it is unacceptable in 2009 that people will die of this disease or any other based on the color of their skin or where they live or what language they speak. It just shouldn't happen. And as we talk about sort of the healthcare debate, the two most important things to us are that if you are a cancer survivor, you should have access to insurance. So this idea that having a pre-existing condition should not exclude you from being covered. And the other is that if you are diagnosed with cancer, you deserve to have access to the treatment that we know works. So the frame of reference I'll give you is that this year 600,000 Americans will lose their life to cancer. If we did no more additional research, not one more dollar, we could cut that number in half. We can save 300,000 lives today if we just apply what we know already works. I'll tell you an interesting story. Lance and I had the privilege of being on an airplane with President Clinton about 4 years ago. And we were talking to him. He said, "What are you guys doing? What are you working on?" And we were talking to him about just this. We said, "Look, it is not acceptable that some people are surviving and some people are dying." And he sort of was listening and listening, and he finally looked across and he said, "That's exactly the same argument or rationale that I use for why I'm doing my work in Africa. People there are dying of AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis. People in the United States are not. It is not acceptable that in one part of the world, people are suffering, and in another part, we figured it out." So it really resonated with us that night. I will tell you a funny story. I'm mortified of flying. I fly every week, a few times a week, and it's the biggest fear that I have. And it's miserable. And I always say, if I didn't have the best job in the world, there's no way I could do this. So we're sitting on the plane. I'm sitting across from President Clinton, and we hit what I would describe as turbulence. I don't think anybody else on the plane thought it was turbulence. But he noticed my reaction. I sort of grabbed onto the seat, and he looked across at me, and he said, "Doug, you had cancer 3 times. This plane is not going down." And even flying in last night, I was thinking about that story when it was a little bumpy coming in. But that conversation with President Clinton led us to 2 years of research on the global burden of cancer. We wanted to understand what was going on around the world. We had been solely focused on the issue domestically. And what that research showed was that there was still an enormous stigma associated with the disease. In many parts of the world, people think cancer is contagious. In many parts, people think if you get cancer, it's your own fault. And in some parts, people think that it is a death sentence. And so if you don't reduce that stigma, it's hard to penetrate with great NGOs and great educational programs. And so we started last summer. Our board approved the LiveStrong Global Cancer Campaign. And about a week after the board voted, Lance, who's our chairman of the board, called me and he said, "Do you think it would help if I rode my bike again?" And I thought, absolutely. I said, "But I can't make that decision for you. That's a commitment you have to make." And as we all know, he decided to do that, and we just culminated our LiveStrong campaign for this year with a summit in Dublin where we had 500 advocates from 69 countries who all came together for the first time to talk about what they were doing to fight cancer all around the world. And we actually modeled it after the Clinton Global Initiative, where each of those individuals had to make a significant commitment, which we will now monitor in order to evaluate the results. Another thing that we did at this first ever LiveStrong Global Cancer Summit is we announced for the first time an economic impact study that we did in partnership with The Economist. Many groups around the world, the World Health Organization and others, have said, well, we don't know what it's going to take to fight cancer. So until we know, we can't really help. We can't develop a global fund. We can't encourage other philanthropists in other countries to contribute because we just don't know what the number is. So Just to give you another frame of reference, 28 million people in the world have survived cancer and are still alive, so there are 28 million survivors. With the aging population, the incidence of cancer is scheduled to double by 2020. So this year, 8 million people will die of the disease around the world, and that will become 17 million by 2020 if we do not act. What this economic impact study showed was that currently, new diagnoses of cancer in 2009 are costing us $300 billion a year, just the new diagnoses. What it also showed is that more than 50% of all new cancer cases are in the developing world. Cancer up till now has been seen as a disease of the developed world, of North America, Western Europe. We know that that's not the case anymore. And what it also showed was that of all the resources being put into the fight against cancer, whether in education or research or any other sector, 5% of the resources are going to the developing world. So 50% of all the cases are there and only 5% of the resources. So we hope that this landmark study will fuel investment from people all around the world. So this is just the beginning, but it goes back to that central theme, which is we know what works. The example I would give you is that in Africa, 230,000 women this year will die of cervical cancer. The number in the United States is 12,000. We now have a vaccine for the HPV virus, which would eliminate 85% of all deaths due to cervical cancer. So historically, cancer in the United States has been seen as a research issue. I'm going to donate money, I'm going to participate in this event, we're going to fund research. What we know is today, without any additional research, and I'm not downplaying the importance or significance of biomedical research at all, but without any additional research, we could save 50% of all the people who die of this disease. And so we think that that's a central theme of our work going forward. It's ambitious. Again, we are totally audacious and totally naive to the point where we really think we are going to change the world. I'll just close with two thoughts. One, again, it's quite humbling to be here because when I was in the hospital in 1996, I received a bunch of mail. And I received calls from people and letters and cards. But the thing that got me the most excited was I got a package one day, and the return address said the White House. And I had never seen anything like it before. And it was a handwritten note from the President and Mrs. Clinton. And it's just amazing how life works in cycles. I mean, if you would have told me I'd be here speaking to all of you and touring the library and having met the President and being part of this, I would have told you were crazy at the time. But it all comes back for me as an individual, as an advocate, as an activist, and as someone who has spent my short career so far in the nonprofit sector to this idea that really was instilled in me at an early age and having grown up in this unique place called Columbia, Maryland. And that is this difference between a community and a crowd. And it's something that my parents talked about, it's something that my brother learned and talked about, it's something that people we knew talked about. And it's pretty simple. And it is that in a crowd, people push and they shove and they elbow and they try and get ahead of one another. And in a community, people look around and they realize that at the end of the day, when all is said and done, unless we all move forward together, no one is truly getting ahead. And so it's great to be here in this room with a true community of people who care about the world in which we live and who have given so much of their time and energy and resources to make it a better place. Thank you very much.
We do have time for some questions. If you raise your hand, we'll get a microphone to you.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. My name is Kim Caldwell. I'm a student at the Clinton School, but I'm also, like Judy, a recent transfer from Austin, Texas. And I told you earlier, I had the opportunity to consult with a program at your organization, and I feel like, one, I owe so much of my own understanding to the true impact of your work, not just globally, but on an individual through what I learned about their survivor care program. And I feel like Melissa would want me to make sure that you talked about that, because since I learned about that program, I myself made multiple references for people, because you don't always know that Lance Armstrong Foundation can help you. And second, I was hoping that you could speak to some of what you've done to develop community, both in your office building and its location, because I feel like there is this complete story that I know that other people can maybe hear 30 seconds of and
Sure.
feel even more excited about the work that you're doing.
Sure. Well, Melissa will be happy that you did bring up Survivor Care. It's an incredible program, direct service program for people who are diagnosed with cancer to help them with financial issues, to help them with clinical issues if they need to find a clinical trial or a second opinion, and also to help them with psychosocial and emotional issues. It's staffed and run by social workers. It's free of charge, and we've invested a lot of money in it to make sure that the service is excellent. One of the things that happens when we get the survey results back from this program is people say, I can't believe somebody called me back. And I think, gosh, what a sad sort of indictment of the world in which we live. So Survivor Care is one example. I will just say that one of the challenges we have, and one of the challenges that I see in the nonprofit world, is providing direct service and doing advocacy are two totally different things in many regards. They're two totally different disciplines. And so within our office, there's a split. There's people who work on our direct service programs, and there's people who work on our policy and grassroots advocacy. And that's a challenge. It's something that we sort of want to figure out. A lot of groups start as direct service, and then they evolve into advocacy, and they forget sort of the service side. But the service side is really what fuels you. The people who you help, who are so grateful for the support and programming, are those who become your strongest advocates. And so I think they have to be inextricably tied. So we just moved into a new office, an old warehouse. For those of you who've ever been to Austin, Texas, Austin is very divided. It's very divided east and west. East of I-35 has traditionally been sort of the underserved part of town. So we bought an old warehouse in East Austin. We converted it. It's a gold LEED certified building. And what we did is we opened it up to the community. So any nonprofit can use the space for free. And we've been in the building for 5 months. We've had 70 groups use it as of last week. So pretty much every night there is a group using the boardroom or the big open multi-purpose space. And it's really allowed us to show the community that yes, we're focused on cancer, but this is about this idea of community. I mean, we're all in this together, and all of these sort of social service organizations and civic organizations are linked. They're linked because they're providing a social good or a social service to the community. So it's one way that we're able to give back. It's also a way that we're able to expose our mission to more people who interact with it.
Leah?
Could you talk a little bit about the relationship between the Lance Armstrong Foundation and the Canyon Ranch Institute? And I understand there was a fundraiser last week, and how did it go?
There was. The question was the relationship between the foundation and the Canyon Ranch Institute. Canyon Ranch Institute is based in Tucson, Canyon Ranch. And the Canyon Ranch Institute is now run by Rich Carmona. And Dr. Carmona was the former Surgeon General who resigned, stepped down, however you want to describe it, because he was one of the people who was really behind this landmark study on tobacco and what we should do as a country on tobacco. And some of the recommendations were stalled and weren't acted upon by the administration. And so he said, I can't sort of be in this place anymore. So he's now in Tucson, and we are creating with them, hopefully, a series of wellness programs and opportunities to really get people who have had cancer back to their lives. And we know sometimes organizations can be what I would describe as preachy. They can say, oh, you just got to go eat 9 fruits and vegetables a day, and you just got to go exercise for 30 minutes a day. Well, that's not realistic. For many, many people, it is not realistic. And so Dr. Carmona has been a great advocate for public health, for exercise, for nutrition, for all the things that Canyon Ranch really stands for. And so we had an event there last week as part of LiveStrong Week, and really trying to figure out how we can develop something as a model that can be applied to many people's lives. I didn't get to go. It's a very highly coveted trip for people on the staff who want to travel to Canyon Ranch for that experience, which I hear is phenomenal.
Right there.
It's a great question. So one of the things that I think has been so successful, again, I mentioned it earlier, and I talked to Lance. Lance understands this. You know, he in many regards is incredibly lucky that he had cancer, because a lot of visible people, athletes, celebrities, actors, you know, they want to do great work. They want to give back. But sometimes they struggle to find a cause that they're passionate about. So he's been fortunate that the cause really found him. The other piece is that we've been fortunate to be around and operating while he's competing. You know, he could have waited till he retired and the impact would have been significantly diminished. So next year he will be racing on Team Radio Shack. And Radio Shack has been a new partner of ours over the last 2 months since they announced their sponsorship of the cycling team. And they have been, and I'll be the first to admit, and if their CEO was here, I've told him the same story, so I'm not speaking out of turn. I have not been in a Radio Shack in at least 15 years. But they have been unbelievable so far. I'll give you a couple of examples. They have 5,000 stores in the United States, and they have stores in every type of neighborhood in this country. So they reach an incredibly diverse demographic. So they came to us and they said, what can we do to help you this year? So as of last Friday, they started several things. As of last Friday, which was Livestrong Day, every purchase at every Radio Shack on the terminal, you will be asked, do you want to add $1 for Livestrong? That will run throughout the rest of the year. Their goal is that will raise $1.5 million just because of their reach. The other thing they did last Friday is they started selling yellow wristbands. We have never had a retail partner with that type of reach that sold yellow wristbands. Julian Day, their CEO, called me on Monday last week and said, I have preliminary information for you, but on Friday we sold 100,000 in one day. So again, it just shows you the volume and the scale of the operation. The other thing they're doing this winter is Lance has a new book coming out, which is a photography tabletop book that details this last year of this comeback, so to speak, in pictures. Radio Shack bought 50,000 books, basically 10 per store, and they are selling them as sort of a holiday gift with a special commemorative cover and donating all of their profit from those books back to us, which will be almost another $1 million. So this is from a company who we've only known for about 2 months, and a company who was searching for a cause. They had dabbled in different sort of philanthropic initiatives over the years, and so far it's been phenomenal. I'll also tell you that we're really trying to leverage, you know, Lance's racing. So he tomorrow heads to Paris for the announcement of the route for the Tour de France, and he's having lunch with President Sarkozy to talk about what the French government will do to fight cancer and what they will announce during the tour next year. So those are the types of relationships and partnerships that allow us to remain relatively small given the size of the market and the size of the cancer burden.
We have time for one more. Allie.
Hi, my name is Allie Tur. I'm also a student here at the Clinton School. Thank you for joining us here today.
Thanks.
Several weeks ago, 10 students here were able to travel to New York City to volunteer at the Clinton Global Initiative in New York City. And it was really incredible to see world leaders and nonprofit executives all coming together and turning thought into action through commitments. And so it's really exciting to hear that you're using that model in Dublin. So I'd really love to hear if you could speak about maybe some of the commitments that were generated at your meeting or some of the unique partnerships that you saw formed on a global scale.
Absolutely. We announced this global campaign, ironically enough, at the Clinton Global Initiative last September. And we really wanted to, you know, anybody can plan a meeting, anybody can plan a conference. But the idea is that if you encourage and require people to make commitments, then the level of engagement is that much higher. And so we just love that concept. And we knew that if we did something in terms of a global summit, we knew that everybody would want to go. And so we had to have a way to sort of make sure we were getting the highest level engagement. So we required that people make commitments, and they weren't structured from us. It wasn't that we sort of went into a country and said, oh, no, here's how you should do it in your country. It was based on what the need was in that country. So I'll give you an example. There was a commitment made by King Abdullah II of Jordan to build a brand new state-of-the-art cancer center in the Middle East in honor of his father, King Hussein, who died of cancer. So they have committed $300 million to build the first of its kind in Amman, Jordan. So what they found was that the vast majority of people who had resources from that region were coming to the United States. And they said, this is crazy. we should have our own cancer center. And so they have actually broken ground on that already. So that's sort of at the highest level, that's one commitment. At a different level, we have commitments from, for instance, Africa, where women are using bicycles to ride into rural villages and educate about HPV and the vaccination. So that's sort of two ends of the spectrum. In Asia, there's been a lot of work or a lot of commitments made around tobacco control, and there's been a lot of commitments made around palliative care, making sure that people who are dying have access to pain relief. This didn't exclude the United States, so there was a woman in Florida named Andrea Ivory who committed to expand her Florida breast health initiative, literally volunteers going door to door, knocking on doors, encouraging people to get screened and get mammograms and take care of their health. So the exciting thing is that in 6 months, we will be able to tally, and again in a year and in 18 months, and we'll be able to say, here's what's happened as a result of this one meeting. And so when we went to our board of directors and we said, look, we're going to spend $2 million on this summit, and some people said, $2 million on a meeting? They said, well, why is it so expensive? We had to actually pay to fly in almost every person. Of the 500 delegates who came to the summit, 62 of them, it was the first time leaving their country. First time they'd ever been out of the country. So it shows you sort of how raw this field is in terms of the work that's going on. It's very disparate, but the energy and excitement during the summit was off the charts. And the partnerships and collaborations that have been started since then is pretty phenomenal. So it's just the beginning.